All right, we are live. We are thankful for your presence. We are thankful to God to be here. We're thankful for those who have joined us by way of the internet. We ask that if you hear something today that you have not heard before and you have any questions, that you would get a hold of us and allow us to answer your questions. We care about what you would like to know, and we would love to conversate with you. We are in Matthew chapter 5. We're going to be picking up in verse number 27. And we have been in Matthew 5. We're doing our level best to get through the material and to learn something, what God would want us to know from this material. In verse 27, it begins, "You have heard that it was said by them of old time, thou shalt not commit adultery." Jesus here deals with what they have heard. What they had heard that had been taught by the rabbis and the teachers, and this was man's interpretation of the seventh commandment. Now, we talked about in weeks prior, they were only worried about that mechanical observation of the law. Thou shalt not murder. And we talked last week how he said, but if you hate your brother, you have murder in your heart, right? He's getting to the point of the law has more to do with man's heart. Where do all the evil things come from? Our heart. All the evil imaginations, all of the murders and the hatred, and all of this comes from within man. A man is defiled from within, and that's what God is wanting to clean up, the inward man. He says, you have heard, but in verse 28 he says, but I say unto you, denoting his authority. What he is going to do is he's going to uncover the true meaning of the seventh commandment that was given, that whosoever looketh upon a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. Now, this is a verse that has been misapplied and misunderstood. For a man to look upon a woman and lust after her, he's committed adultery with her in his heart, but he has not committed the actual act of adultery. Which one of those is worse? The looking and lusting, or the actual act of adultery? The actual act of adultery is worse. But he's not trying to say that if you look and lust, that you have committed adultery. He's bringing the point that sin is sin. And to look at a woman and to lust after her is wrong. If a man does not look at a woman, and this word look means to gaze prolongingly, to set your eyes upon, and it has the idea of the lust as the imagination of man, undressing her, going through physical actions with her. The Jews viewed the seventh commandment, as long as I don't do that physical act, I'm fine. And Jesus says, no, you're not. Because a man's imagination is a gift from God, right? God has given us imagination, and it's a wonderful thing. We think of children that are playing, and you see their imagination and how much fun and joy that they can have in their make-believe world. But men grow up and can use that imagination for wicked things. Go ahead.
Jesus had to be, it was pretty rough on Jesus, because he could know their thoughts. We don't know their people's thoughts,
Right.
And how, you know, everybody that he come in contact with is like, whoa.
Yeah, and isn't it interesting that Jesus, having the power to actually read the mind, know what's in a man, and how he still treated people? How would we treat people if we literally could know their heart and know their thoughts? Would we be as loving and kind and still have the mission to seek and save if we had that ability? And we couldn't handle that ability. We're not built like Jesus to be able to handle that kind of information. But he says that if you look upon a woman, where does lust begin? Where does that desire begin?
Need to have a pure heart.
Right? But it begins, he points back to the eyes. And isn't it interesting that the very thing that God has given us to see with can be the very thing that causes us to stumble? See, it can be a great blessing, but it can also be a great curse. What keeps our eyes from becoming a curse and a stumbling block to us?
Our mind.
Our heart, our mind. The word I'm looking for is discipline. Being disciplined. Get Job 31 and read verse 1.
I have made a covenant with my eyes. How then can I glaze at a virgin?
Yeah. And it's interesting if you look at verses 9 through 12. Read 9 through 12.
If my heart has been enticed towards a woman, and I have lain in wait at my neighbor's door, then let my wife grind for another, and let others bow down on her. For that would be a horrendous crime, that would be an iniquity to be punished by the judges.
Yeah, and in verse 12 he says, for it is a fire that consumeth to destruction, and would root out all of mine increase. You see, the lust begins with the look, the longing gaze. And there's a really bad, I don't know the word I'm looking for, but it's in society today, especially among men. Women are viewed as an object for self-gratification. Every woman is just an object for my pleasure. Job says, I've made a covenant with my eyes, and I'm not going to look at that young woman. Jesus had a lot of interactions with women, didn't he? Jesus must have viewed every woman as a mother or a sister, someone who should be beheld with tender respect and reverence. Not something that I can fancy in the mind to, gratify my own lust and desires. That's not what women are for. We've got to control the mind and the imagination, because in my mind, in my imagination, if I lust after a woman, if the only thing that is keeping me from committing the act is air and opportunity, if I had a moment alone in a closed door, it would happen. I'm guilty of sin. I may not have committed the overt act of adultery, the physical contact with a woman, but I'm guilty of sin. You see, the Jews had misinterpreted the heart of the law. And Jesus was saying it goes beyond just the overt act. The overt act, just like with murder, it begins with hatred. With adultery, it begins with lust. It begins with the contact with someone that does not belong to you. It begins with coveting something that you have no business coveting. It begins with the conversation with the woman that you have no business talking to. It has a beginning place. There's a germination period, and adultery germinates in the mind. But it's like that with all sin. It's like that with all sin. He says, if you have looked upon a woman to lust after her, you've committed adultery with her in your heart. And then he goes into verse 29, and he starts to talk about how it is we war against sin. And these verses have also been misunderstood and misapplied. And there have been men who have done everything from mutilate themselves to become eunuchs, and so they could not be guilty of sexual perversions. There have been men who have mutilated their limbs, their eyes, all types of things. If the Lord here, he says, if your right eye offend thee, pluck it out. Well, with the eye, you see with, and if I can't see, then I can't lust, right? Well, not really, because I still have an imagination. I still have a mind. So really, if this was literal, you would be better off to cut your head off than you would be to pluck your eye out. That's not, Jesus is not talking literally. What Jesus is getting at here is the attitude, the radical attitude that we should have in warring against sin, about cleansing sin from our lives. If your right eye offend thee, pluck it out, and cast it from thee. For it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. What is the main purpose of his statement right here?
Show you how important that the concept is, that it's the spirit of the law, not the technical part of it.
And that, 2 Corinthians 4, 16 through 18, I think we used it last week in the lesson, where Paul says, for the which cause we faint not, but though our outward man perishes, the inward man is renewed day by day. For our light affliction here on this world, it's just for a moment, but worketh for us a far and exceeding and eternal weight of glory. For we look not at the things which are seen, but the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, the things that are not seen are eternal. It is so much better to suffer a little bit here than it would be to go to hell for all eternity. That's the point he's making. Whatever you go through here to make it to heaven, it's worth it. We sing that song, often I'm hindered on my way, burden so heavy I almost fall. Then I hear Jesus sweetly say, heaven will surely be worth it all. Heaven will surely be worth it all, worth all the sorrow that here befall. After the life with all its strife, heaven will surely be worth it all. If I have to practice discipline upon myself to whatever degree it is, heaven's worth it. Jesus is saying here, you don't want to go to hell. There's a lot of people in this world that say hell don't exist. That once you die, you're dead, and that's it. Jesus knows nothing of that. He says you got to do whatever you need to do to remain saved. It's not about bodily mutilation. It's about self-discipline and how I need to work on that. And I'm sure that we all have a room for improvement in that. He goes on to say in verse 30, if thy right hand offend thee, cut it off. Now he keeps using right because your right hand was considered dominant. It was the most important, if you will. I'm right-handed. I would be severely handicapped, of course, without a hand, but without the right one, it would be worse. And so he uses the right eye as well. If you lose one eye, you still got another. You can still see. While you may not have great peripheral vision here, you still have some vision. And you can see pretty good with one eye. You'd be handicapped with one hand, right? If your right hand offend you, cut it off, cast it from you, for it is profitable for thee. For one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. I mean, how many times does the Lord have to say something for it to take on an eternal weight of importance? Here, within just a couple verses, he has admonished the human race to do whatever they can, whatever possible, to live separate from sin.
I was just going to say, God makes evident throughout the Bible the main thing about that we're to do is obedience. So how many different ways does he teach us that throughout the whole thing?
Yep. It's important that we listen. That's part of the problem with the world and the religious world in general is we pay no attention to the Lord. Religious people who believe in annihilationism, that there is no hell, who are they not listening to? They're not listening to the Lord. People say, well, I just want to see them words in red. Well, here it is, right here, which I believe they're all red. But this was the actual uttered words of Jesus. Verse number 31. It hath been said. This is a shortened version of what he had been saying. It had been said in old time. It hath been said, whoever shall put away his wife, let him give her a writing of divorcement. What was the practice of this day and time? Certificates of divorce. Who owned the right to divorce? Men. Women really had no right to call for the separation of their marriage. And he is going to be talking about this Deuteronomy 24, 1-4. Let's just go over here and read it. This is going back to Moses, Deuteronomy 24, 1-4. It says this: when a man hath taken a wife and married her, and it come to pass that she find no favor in his eyes. What is this? What has she done? She burned the biscuits. She has no favor in his eyes. She doesn't fold his laundry the way that he prefers. She has no favor in his eyes. And it come to pass, she finds no favor, because he hath found some uncleanness in her. Now, there is a definition for uncleanness in the marital bond, and it is adultery. It's if your woman, or it would apply for a man too, has lain with another person outside of that marital contract, they're unclean. And the law stated that if a woman was guilty of adultery and was put away, she was considered unclean, and her husband couldn't take her back. That's how the men interpreted the law. That's what they said. But he has found some uncleanness in her, then let him write her a bill of divorcement and give it in her hand and send her out of his house. And when she is departed out of his house, she may go and be another man's wife. And if the latter husband hate her and write her a bill of divorcement, and giveth it in her hand, and sendeth her out of his house, or if the latter husband die, which took her to be his wife, her former husband, which sent her away, may not take her again to be his wife. After that she is defiled, for that is an abomination before the Lord. Thou shalt not cause the land to sin, which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance. So that is what these men are going off of here. But Jesus made a statement about what Moses said in Deuteronomy 24 in Matthew 19. Jesus makes a statement that is so important for us to consider. In Matthew 19, and we will cover this again probably in 6 months when we get here, but it had come to pass that when Jesus had finished these sayings, he departed from Galilee, came to the coast of Judea beyond Jordan, and great multitudes followed him, and he healed them there. The Pharisees also came unto him, tempting him, and saying unto him, Is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause? Going back here to Deuteronomy 24, she don't have any favor in his eyes, right? She cannot make an apple pie like my mama. And I just can't put up with that. I want apple pie like my mama made. He says in verse 4, And he answered and said unto them, Have you not read? Where's Jesus pointing to for authority? The Scriptures. Have you not read? This is Genesis 1, 26 and 27. Jesus goes all the way back to the beginning. All the way back to when God formed man out of the dust of the earth. And he made them male and female. He says, Have you not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female? And for this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and cleave to his wife, and they twain be one flesh. This is going back Genesis 5:2. Wherefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. So what is the original intent for marriage right here in verses 4 through 6? Jesus he doesn't go back to Moses. He goes back to the garden, creation. And he says that a man will leave his father and mother, cleave to his wife, they will be one flesh, and that God has joined them, and what God joins together, let no man separate. So they say unto him, they ask him a question. He's answered their question. So they ask him, Why did Moses then command to give a writing of divorcement? Moses said it. Moses was the prophet of God. Moses gave the law. Moses was the great lawgiver, and he commanded them to give a writing of divorcement. So they asked Jesus this question, and to put her away. And he said unto them, verse 8, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, suffered you to put away your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. Moses saw a great problem with how men were treating women. Women had no leg in society. The only place that a woman had protection was at home if her husband loved her and was good to her. The writing of divorcement and her not being able to go back to the man that put her away was a protection for the woman so that she wouldn't be passed like a football between irresponsible men. That's what that was for. Moses allowed it, suffered it, because the men's heart were so hard. Had he not given this exception, the women would have been treated even more terribly than they were. Women were just a mode of gratification for men's thoughts. And the word lust, when we were talking about lust, it literally means mental rape. That's what that, when you lust after a woman, and in the context of adultery, that's what it means, mental rape. Some men don't stop at mental rape. Some men have no control of their desires. And what happens to some women, even today? They're abused and taken advantage of. When we were in Judges, we were talking about a concubine that was sent out. And what happened to her? She was raped to death by a gang of men. No discipline, no control. Moses allowed them for a time, but Jesus says it was not so from the beginning. From the beginning, it was a man leave his father and mother, cleave to his wife, and what God joins together, let not man put asunder. He says, and I say unto you, whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and marry another, commits adultery. And whoso marrieth her which is put away, doth commit adultery. This is Matthew 19:9. We're going to go back to Matthew 5, but it doesn't need a whole lot of explaining what Jesus is saying here. If we read it without the exceptive clause, it reads like this. And I say unto you, whosoever shall put away his wife and marry another commits adultery. And whosoever marrieth her which is put away doth commit adultery. What's the exceptive clause? What's the one reason that Jesus gives for the dissolving of a marriage? Fornication. The word is porneia, and it means sexual intercourse. I think it's probably sexual intercourse of any kind, any sexual touching that belongs in the marriage bond cannot go outside of your marriage bond for your sexual gratification. Your body belongs to your spouse. Back in Matthew chapter 5. Let me get to the right page. So he says, again, verse 33. You have heard that it hath been said by them of old time, thou shalt not forswear thyself, but shalt perform unto the Lord thine oaths. But I say unto you, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, neither by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. They said, you know what? You do not swear thyself or perform, but perform your oath, unto the Lord your oaths. The Jewish people would swear by anything but God's name. They would swear by heaven. They would swear by the earth. They would swear by the city of Jerusalem. And what is interesting about those things is all of those things are intimately connected to God. That's what Jesus is saying here. You're saying you're not going to swear using the Lord's name, but you swear against heaven, and that's the Lord's throne. You swear against the earth, and that's the Lord's footstool. That's Isaiah 66:1. You swear against Jerusalem, and that is his city. He says, I say unto you, swear not at all, neither by heaven, neither by earth, or neither by the city. Verse 36, neither shalt thou swear by thy head. You ever heard this? I put that on my grandmama's grave. I put that on my mama. He says you don't even swear by your own head because you can't make one hair white or black. Now, I wish I got some white coming in. I wish I could do something about it. You have no power. I couldn't even save my hair from falling out, much less change its color without just for men. But that's not what he's talking about. You can do nothing, but let your communication, let what you say be yea, yea, or nay, nay. For whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil. What's Jesus saying here?
Saying that our word is our bond, and there's no need for swearing.
No
Because
need.
anything else is a lie. And what's a lie? That's a sin. And we're not to sin.
Tell you something that our society needs today. That right there. It wasn't too long ago. And Herschel and some of you have lived in these times where a man's word was as good as what? You couldn't draw up a contract that would be any more binding than what a man said. Farmer sells a man a cow for X number of dollars. They shake on it. Guess what the farmer expects? X number of dollars. Guess what Joe from down the street that bought the cow does? Pays him. We live in a time where people's word means absolutely nothing. Wishy-washy. You can't depend on it. But Jesus, speaking about kingdom citizens, that is how we live. That is what is supposed to, we're supposed to be about our word. Our word is supposed to mean something. When we say we will do, then we do. He says here, anything other than that is evil. If I give someone my word and go back on that, what have I done?
Said you was gonna do it.
But then I don't do it, and what is that? It's a lie. I have effectually lied if I don't keep my word. What does Revelation 21:8 say? It says, for the fearful and the unbelieving, the abominable and murderers, adulterers, whoremongers, sorcerers, and all who? All liars will have their part in the lake which burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. Jesus wants us to be truthful. Go ahead.
There's also, yes, there's your bond, right? And there's also added on to that, let's go back to your example, the cow. And the farmer is going to sell the cow. And I've been in this instance before, not with a cow, but and you negotiate, the two men negotiate, their bond is good, they exchange money. The new man takes the cow home and he finds something wrong with the cow. He then goes back to the farmer. Nowadays, farmer would say, hey, too bad, so sad, for
Right.
you, But the other side of that is the farmer says, yeah, maybe that could be true. I think maybe you're right, okay. And he makes it right, is I guess
Right.
my point. He makes it right. So there's also that added part of having your bond.
Right.
Sometimes things don't go exactly perfectly, and you can say, yeah, well, I stuck to my word, but there's also that extra step you can take.
Right. And that would be covered in this, and you've brought it out to a more full degree, that in that kind of contractual situation, there's duty on both sides. The farmer has a duty to sell a good cow. The person has a duty to pay for it. And what he's getting at is integrity in our dealings. We are to be people of high moral standards, high ethical standards. Jesus was the most ethical person. He lived the highest moral life that could be lived. Go ahead.
So once again, it's about the spirit of the matter, not the technical part of it.
Yes. It's about being pleasing to God. That's what would God have? We used to have those bracelets. What would Jesus do? And while that's cliche, it's very true. If we want to be pleasing to him, you perform your oaths. Verse 34. No, we're past that. Verse 38. You have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Do we not hear that a lot in society? And people have the attitude that I don't get even, I get ahead. You know, and that's the world we live in. Everybody wants a pound of flesh. And they use this saying in a wrong way, in a bad way, and misinterpret it. What system was set up for someone to decide the eye for an eye and the tooth for a tooth? There was a system of judges and rulers that decided cases. So if someone wronged you, you had to go to court. You had to go through the legal proceedings and get a ruling in your favor. It's used today for people to think that, well, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. If he smacks me, then I'm going to smack him right back. If he steals something from me, I'm going to go steal something from him. That's not what this is saying. There is a legal system, a way of operations to get the result that you want to get, that you are justly due. But it has to go through the justice system. There was a great justice system in Israel. Go ahead.
And the law contained lots of rules about exact recompense for this and that.
Yep. And if you got a ruling in your favor, justice was served. If you got something stole from you, they had to pay 4 times over. I mean, it pays to go through the justice system. And that's pleasing in God's sight. You've heard it has been said, but verse 39, I say to you that you resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also. You talk about tough. You talk about challenging. There are instances where pacifism is not the course of action. Jesus, when he was attacked personally, was the Lamb of God. So he opened not his mouth. Like a sheep brought before his shears is dumb, he didn't resist. When Jesus goes to the temple and he sees God under attack, he braids a whip of cords and turns over the tables and drives men out of the temple. When men have gathered around a woman taken in the act of adultery and they've picked up stones, he goes to the center of the ring and he calls them down. When other people were involved, Jesus was the Lion of the tribe of Judah. When it was personal, he was the Lamb. I can suffer a certain level of personal attack. I'm not talking about somebody drawing a knife and not doing nothing. I have a responsibility to protect my life. I have a family to look after, and you do too. And I have more of a responsibility to my family than I have to my enemy. Somebody touches my wife or my kids, I'm not going to turn the other cheek. I'm going to protect them. And we're out of time. I think this will be a great place to pick up next week because there's a lot to discuss. With this, thank you so much for your attention and participation in this class.